Finally, Season 4 is just around the corner and it feels like it's been an eternity since a new season has dropped, but it's finally here. And kicking things off, we're going to start with the fastest leveling build for the Barbarian. Now, this build has a lot going for it. It has very low gear requirements. You can get this one going with next to nothing. The resource management is easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's going to be very little downtime. You don't worry about spamming basic skills or anything like that. High DPS, low CDR, great tankiness as well, and I think best of all, you get to use Iron Maelstrom, aka Kratos build. And especially when you consider that the fastest way to level this time around is going to be through Helltides. Now, if you don't want to miss my video on that, on the best leveling route, and you don't want to see your boy out on the streets, consider giving the video, you know, a little bit of a subscriber doodle-doo, and maybe even slap that like button if you're feeling real generous. Now, right quick, just before we start breaking down the build, I want to show you this sick new feature that we've added over on Mobalytics. As most of you know, I write over at Mobalytics, all of my build guides and stuff like this, but now we have variants, meaning that there are early, mid-game, end-game, etc. versions of every single build built in, which is fantastic. Of course, there'll be a link down to this build in the description below. And don't forget, we've got an app. If you want to download the app, have access to all of this information in-game without having to tab out and all that bollocks, then that is also an option. Again, link down in the description for you there. But let's start breaking down this build bit by bit. So kicking things off, I'm going to talk about what's different between each of the variants and then leave the build guide itself actually to fill in the gaps. Otherwise, this is going to be a 45-minute video and ain't nobody got time for that. So with the early variant, of course, we're not going to have every single aspect on every single piece of gear. It's both unnecessary, and if this is your first character of the season, unreasonable. You're not going to have the materials to do this, so we're only focusing on the very important ones. Also, one thing that's different about this stage of the build is that we are going to be using the two-handed sword technique. This is kind of the, you know, general highest DPS one that you use until you unlock a way to get enemies vulnerable a little bit later on. And then when it comes to gems as well, this is a little different here. We're going to be using skulls in the weapons. This is going to give us some health on kill, which will help us stay up, you know, with sustain and all of that stuff. But this build is very simple to play, even this early on. Essentially, what you're going to be doing is alternating between lunging strike and upheaval. And this is going to give you all of the benefits of weapon swapping. So they're going to be proccing your earth strikers. You're going to be generating fury through furious impulse, and you know, if you have luckily hit some other of the weapon swapping aspects that you'll see later on in the build, then you'll be benefiting from those as well. But nice and simple. You can set it up so you just go left click, right click, left click, right click, and you'll be deleting everything on screen. Iron Skin is in here because this is going to be our form of unstoppable. So anytime you get hit by CC, bang, press number 1 or whatever button you've keybound it to, and you're scot-free. You know, you're back at it and causing mayhem. We got Ground Stomp as well, does a very good job at reducing damage. When you get into a real spicy pack, you just stun a lot of them and they're gone. Huge boost to Fury as well. Now, we do swap this a little bit later on. I'll talk about that in a second. And then you got Death Blow, of course. Once you're really up and running with this build, not so much in the early game, but a little bit later on, you'll be alternating between Upheaval and Death Blow. So you're just kind of slapping the crap out of everything, and it does feel really good. And of course, like I said, you have Iron Maelstrom, which is going to be your sort of main deletion button. Everything that is on screen will just go bye-bye every time you press this. And when you're using this in Helltides with like the Blood Maven and stuff like that, holy moly, I think every time you press your ultimate, you're just going to go up a level. So it's going to be really fun. And of course, this cooldown will be reduced every time you swap weapons, which this build does. So this is going to be popping off all the time. Now, when it comes to weapon technique and selection, like I said, you want your technique set to two-handed swords once you've unlocked that via the class quest at level 15. As for weapon assigning, I recommend keeping Upheaval on two-handed mace because you'll want it on this later on anyways, and then Death Blow on two-handed sword. Now, when it comes to stat priority this early on, I'm talking like everything before World Tier 3, it really doesn't matter all that much. Don't agonize over this too much. But, you know, if you can get some armor, some health on your gear, if you can get strength specifically is probably the best overall stat to get. Resistances, I wouldn't even think about right now. As far as utility stats, cooldown reduction, you can't get enough for it to do anything at this point. And movement speed, again, more or less the same issue, but you know, it's a little bit more worth. If you do see it, I'd probably use it, and then that's about it. You know, don't focus too much on it just now. That's gonna come in the mid game, which we're moving on to now. Okay, now we move on to the mid-game section, and this is everything from World Tier 3 up to level 100. You can see we've got no uniques in here, but that's because, again, I don't think it's realistic to expect to have any at this point, but if you do hit some, check the end game variations so you know what to replace to equip those pieces of gear. As I said, again, we'll leave the breakdown of all of these to the build planner. You can just kind of copy them along as you get them. We have changed a few things as well. We've moved to rubies on our weapon. We're going to be having much more consistent overpowers so we can lean into that damage type a lot more. You will want to worry about resistances at this point too. So what I've done with the build planner is put all resist on any piece of gear that I would have resistance on. Now that's interchangeable. You need to pick the resistances you're not capped in. If you get all resist on all of them, fantastic. That's probably a good way to start, but you want to make sure you're not just going all into fire resist or something like that. So when it comes to your jewelry, when it comes to your stats, make sure you're mix and matching it to get the most even suite of resistances as possible. When it comes to armor, you want to slowly start working your way up to the end game cap, which is around about 9,000. Now don't expect to have this straight away, but what you want to try and do is get the tooltip in game to as close to cap as humanly possible, and you can see that here by hovering over the armor stat in game. You can also start looking at cooldown reduction a little bit more seriously. Same with movement speed. You'll start with, you know, especially sacred gear and ancestral gears, getting it in amount to actually make a difference. So you can start stacking that as well. You will also now be padding out your Paragon board. I would recommend following it as it is in the build planner, you know, a linear fashion. Just go through it that way. Go straight up toward the Warbringer build, then go to the right, and then go up and finish on the Decimator board. And that should be just fine for you. And don't worry, skill tree remains the same throughout all of these builds. You don't have to worry about far arsing around with that or anything like that. And then finally, looking at the end game version of this build. Now, this is what I would consider everything like post level 100. Now, you will probably start ticking some of these boxes before you hit level 100, but this is kind of the end game for the build. And let's have a look at what's changed here. So now we have a Tusk Helm of Uritz the Mighty. This build is built around Berserking, so this helmet, very natural, powerful pick for it. Banished Lord's Talisman, it may have got nerfed into the ground, but it is still really strong. And the Ring of Red Fury, again, something that's really powerful with this build here as well. Then we have the Hellhammer. This is why I said earlier you want to have upheaval set to the two-handed bludgeoning weapon, because you're going to be using the Hellhammer, and that's how you're going to need it set up in the end game anyways. And, you know, there is an argument for using the overkill with this build. I'll leave that as a variation as well if you want to go into Death Blow more so than the upheaval side of things. But this I find to be the more consistent version of the two, but the variety is there if you choose to use it. Other than that, at this point, the other things that you're going to want to be looking at are making sure that you are working towards the main armor cap for like the highest tier of enemy, which is going to be around 9,000 armor. Resistances, you want all of those at 70% as well. Movement speed cap is 200%. You can get to this as a Barbarian, because don't forget you can get movement speed from things like Berserking and Rally and Cry. You can get like 50% through skills. And then you start with 100, so that's, you know, that's a lot. And then you want to stack as much cooldown reduction as possible as well. It does have a cap now, 75%, which I don't think you're going to reach, so I wouldn't worry too much about that, but do just keep that in mind as you're stacking it out on your gear. And finally, at this point, don't forget to change your weapon technique to two-handed mace, because that is now going to be the best pick for you. And there it is, short and sweet. Hope this is helpful. Best of luck with your Season 4. Don't forget, if you found this useful, to drop the video a like, subscribe to the channel for more content like this. And yeah, check out the Twitch channel maybe. Going to be doing a little couple of streamer doodles over there. And yeah, take care. Love ya. Bye.